October the 25th, 1415. In a muddy field in northern France, 6,000 men are preparing to die. They are English, exhausted, starving, riddled with sickness. For 17 days they have marched through hostile country, on shrinking rations, in rain that never seems to stop. Their king had gambled everything on this campaign, and lost. And now, blocking the road to the safety of Calais, stands the army of France, the flower of French chivalry. Thousands upon thousands of knights and men-at-arms in gleaming plate armor. By some accounts, 4, 5, even 6 times the English numbers. Confident. Fresh. Certain of victory. The French are so sure of the outcome that, the night before the battle, they are said to have diced for the ransoms of English lords they have not yet captured. But the English have something the French do not understand. A weapon that costs a fraction of a knight's armor, drawn by common men, farmers, laborers, craftsmen. The longbow. By nightfall tomorrow, the field will be carpeted with the dead of France's greatest families, and a battle that should have been a massacre will become one instead. Just not the one anyone expected. This is the Battle of Agincourt. Welcome to Historical Club. To understand Agincourt, you must understand the war it belonged to, a conflict so long that no man alive had seen its beginning, and none would live to see its end. History calls it the 100 Years' War, the struggle between England and France over the French crown itself. In the summer of 1415, a new English king decided to press that ancient claim. Henry V. Young, still in his 20s, but no pampered prince. He had spent his youth fighting rebels in Wales, and at 16, he had taken an arrow to the face in battle and kept fighting. The scar he carried was a message. This king had already paid for his crown in blood. Pious, ruthless, and burning to prove himself, Henry gathered an army of perhaps 12,000 men, crossed the Channel, and laid siege to the fortified port of Harfleur, his gateway into Normandy. Harfleur fell, but it fought back hard. The siege dragged on for over a month, and it cost Henry far more than casualties. Dysentery tore through the filthy English camp, and thousands died or were invalided home. By the time the town finally surrendered, the campaigning season was nearly over, and Henry's grand invasion had shrunk to a battered force of perhaps 6,000 fighting men. The sensible move was to sail home and call it a victory. Instead, Henry made a decision that looked like madness. He would march his sick, shrunken army more than 150 miles overland to the English stronghold of Calais, straight through hostile France, a show of defiance. A king's claim to the land, written in footsteps across it. He expected the march to take 8 days. He ordered rations for exactly that. It took 17. The French had no intention of letting him walk home. A great army was gathering, and French forces shadowed the English every step of the way. Every crossing of the River Somme was blocked, every bridge broken or held against him, forcing the starving English to march day after day deeper inland, away from the sea, away from safety, hunting for a ford, while the French host swelled with fresh contingents of knights arriving from every corner of the kingdom. By the time Henry finally slipped across the Somme, his men were eating whatever they could find. Many were sick, and all of them knew they were being hunted. On the 24th of October, near a small village called Agincourt, the trap closed. The French army stood directly across the road to Calais, a wall of steel and banners stretching between two woods. There would be no way around and no way back. That night, the heavens opened and rain fell in sheets. The English camp was silent. The king had ordered quiet on pain of punishment, and men facing death keep their thoughts to themselves. Chroniclers wrote of English soldiers confessing their sins to priests in the darkness. Across the fields, the French camp blazed with fires and rang with laughter and music. Lords argued over who would have the honor of leading the attack. They knew what the morning would bring. Everyone knew. Everyone was wrong. Dawn came gray and sodden. The field between the two armies was a freshly plowed expanse of deep, clinging mud, soaked by weeks of rain and churned by thousands of hooves, and it narrowed like a funnel between two thick woods. That narrow frontage would matter more than anyone yet realized. Henry arranged his little army in a single thin line, with no reserve at all. there were not enough men for one. Men-at-arms in the center, dismounted, the king himself on foot among them in plain sight, wearing a crown fixed to his helmet. And on the flanks, angled forward like the horns of a bull, the great mass of his archers, perhaps 5 men in every 6 of his army. Each carried the English longbow, a 2-meter stave of yew with a draw weight so brutal that the skeletons of lifelong archers grew visibly deformed from boyhood training. A skilled man could loose 10, 12, even 15 arrows a minute. Before their positions, the archers hammered sharpened stakes into the soft ground, a bristling fence of spikes angled at the chest of any charging horse. For 3 hours, the two armies simply stood and stared at each other across the mud. The French were in no hurry. Every passing hour brought them more reinforcements, and the English nowhere to go. So Henry did the audacious thing. He advanced. The entire English line pulled up its stakes, marched across the sodden field to within extreme bowshot, perhaps 300 yards, and planted them again. Had the French charged at that moment, they might have caught the archers unprotected. They did not. And then the arrows began to fall. Volley after volley. Thousands of shafts in the air at once, a hissing steel rain hammering down onto the French lines. Few arrows killed through plate at range, but they maddened horses, found visors, and made standing still unbearable. The storm stung the French into motion, exactly as Henry intended. Their mounted knights charged the English flanks and collapsed into ruin. The deep mud swallowed the horses' legs. The stakes broke the momentum of the charge, and the arrows drove screaming wounded horses back through the ranks of the advancing French infantry, trampling their own men into the mire. Then came the main assault. Thousands of dismounted men-at-arms, the noblest blood of France, wading forward on foot in full plate armor. 60 pounds of steel on every man. Through mud that gripped like glue, churned ever deeper by every rank that had walked before them. The arrow storm forced them to lower their heads against it, like men walking into driving hail, half-blind, exhausted before they ever reached the English line. Some fell, and, pinned by their armor in the sucking mud, drowned in it before ever swinging a blade. And the narrow field did the rest. The woods pressing in on either side funneled that vast army into an ever-tighter heaving crush. The greatest strength of the French, their overwhelming numbers, became the very instrument of their destruction. Those in front were shoved helplessly onto English weapons by the thousands pressing from behind. Men stumbled, fell, and could not rise, and were buried beneath the falling bodies of their own comrades. Chroniclers on both sides describe the dead piling into mounds. When the French tide finally slammed into the thin English line, it bent, but it held. Henry himself fought in the press, part of the crown on his helmet hacked away. And now the archers dropped their bows, took up hatchets, mallets, swords, and daggers, and swarmed the flanks of the floundering French mass. Lightly equipped, sure-footed in the mud, they fell upon exhausted men encased in steel who could barely lift their arms. It was no longer a battle. It was a harvest. Within a few hours, the field was a mound of the dead and the captured. A second French wave attacked and broke against the same slaughter. The third wave, thousands strong, enough on paper to win the battle outright, looked upon that field of horror and melted away. One dark act remains, and honesty demands we face it. Late in the day, with rumors of a fresh French attack, Henry found himself guarding thousands of prisoners, more prisoners than he had soldiers. Fearing they would take up arms again, he ordered the captives killed. Hundreds died before the danger passed and the order was stayed. His own knights recoiled from the task, partly from honor, partly because dead prisoners paid no ransoms, and the grim work fell to the archers. By the harsh laws of war in that age, a king could give such an order. By any human measure, it stains the victory to this day. By dusk, it was over. The dead of France lay in heaps, among them 3 dukes, the constable of France himself, counts, barons, and thousands of knights and men-at-arms. Much of a generation of French nobility wiped out in a single afternoon. French chroniclers themselves put their losses in the thousands. English losses were a fraction, by some accounts barely more than 100, though the true figure was surely higher. Henry marched on to Calais and sailed home to a hero's welcome. London erupting, a legend born. Within 5 years, a bleeding and divided France was forced to the negotiating table. By the Treaty of Troyes, Henry V married the French king's daughter and was recognized as heir to the crown of France itself. The Impossible campaign had delivered the impossible prize. He never wore it. Henry died of sickness, probably dysentery, the same filth-born killer that had gutted his army at Harfleur. In 1422, at just 35 years old, 2 months before the French king whose throne he was to inherit, his infant son inherited 2 crowns and the strength to hold neither. The war ground on for another 3 decades, and in the end, England lost nearly everything Henry had won. But Agincourt endured, as legend, as warning, and as a lesson written in mud and blood, that pride is no armor, that mud can defeat steel, and that on the right ground, on the right day, the few can destroy the many. If this story gripped you, if you believe battles like this deserve to be told properly, then do one small thing for us. Tap that like button and subscribe to Historical Club so the next great story finds its way to you. Ring the bell, tell us in the comments which battle we should tell next, and we will see you on the next one.